Hi, welcome to the Sales Experts channel on Bright Talk. If you're new to the Sales Experts channel, I invite you to check out my colleagues and what they're saying about sales. These are some of the leading sales experts in the country today, and they're all available to you on Bright Talk. I want to welcome you and make sure that you know how to use the platform that we have. So if you're new to the platform, there's a couple things that you ought to know. One is that if you have questions for me, go to Ask Now. And in fact, why don't we all test that out right now? Go ahead and tell me where you're from, or if I know you or you know me or you'd like to know me, introduce yourself. And let's test out that Ask Now section. I'd also like you to know that there are attachments. The presentation itself is an attachment. You're welcome to download that now so that you can follow along. I know some of you like to do that. And if you are also interested, there's other attachments for you to look at later on. There are hundreds and hundreds of talks available through Bright Talk, so I encourage you to look through them. And I want to point out, it's really important, if you're having technical issues, there's nothing I can do about it. You need to click the Bright Talk Help button, and someone there will help you make this work. Sometimes I know you won't be able to hear, or you'll have some other problem, but we have live tech support to help you through any problem like that you have. And we encourage you, when you're done, to rate this presentation, and I also encourage you to engage with us. So we're going to have some surveys and opportunities to ask questions, so go ahead and engage with us as much as you'd like. If you want to ask questions during the presentation, that's great, and we will get to them either right when you're asking or when we finish up. So please ask away. We're eager to answer your questions. So I am Liz Hyman, and I am the sales expert at Alice Hyman LLC and regarding-sales.com. And my mission is to take the mystery out of sales, to make sales manageable and to make sales predictable. And what I would like to do today is help you think about how Playbooks can do that for you. In fact, Playbooks are such the rage right now that my clients are asking me all the time about playbooks. How do we make a playbook? Should we have a playbook? And so I thought, well, what a great opportunity to get an expert on playbooks here today to talk to you. So I invited my friend Kevin Quan, who is a sales playbook expert. So he's going to share his knowledge and experience with you and help you build a playbook that really works. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Liz.
How are you today?
I am great. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I love playbooks, as you know. I love talking about them. As you were introducing yourself, I was thinking back about when we first met, and playbooks maybe weren't quite as popular as they are today. And I was sitting there explaining how I have this platform that does digital playbooks, and you said, you can do that for me. My clients ask for this all the time. And it was an amazing moment. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Quan. I'm the founder and CEO of CloseQuickly. My mission is to simplify playbooks, enable the enablers, so the people who help to make your sales organizations work. And I like playbooking everything. And so a little bit of the background. I've been building playbooks for a long time, close to 20 years. And like everyone else, I'm doing this in PowerPoint, in PDFs, later on in Google Docs. And, I thought there had to be a better way. And so, I first started building this as a tool that I would use because I had a need, and I knew the need really, really well. And so I actually built it once for myself to use at Microsoft. We had an incubation sales team who were doubling the sales force every year. So we went from 30 to 60 to 120 to 200, and we really needed a tool to implement the sales process and put all the sales tools and resources into one place because, the field is always asking for, a single place to get all of their resources. And so I built it once there, and then at Hootsuite, I did it again. And then at some point I thought, there's a need for this, and I know the need really well. And so I built it again and started CloseQuickly. So that's the 30-second background story into how I got into CloseQuickly and Sales Playbooks.
And so just to be really clear, so CloseQuickly is a is a software as a service tool that helps teams to consistently and repeatably, boy, that was a hard word to say today.
Well, that's right. More coffee.
Yeah.
More coffee.
And
so I think
consistently and repeatably follow sales processes to be more effective, right? So you make it super easy to build amazing digital playbooks that people love to use. Is that about right? If I say repeatably properly?
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about consistency and repeatability. And I think, we're going to get into some of that, why would you use a playbook and things like that. But it's about consistency and repeatability. And that's exactly it. We make it super easy to build amazing digital playbooks.
So what I want to do right now is we're going to dive right into how to build the ultimate sales playbook. But before we start, Kevin and I were wondering, how many of you are actually using playbooks right now, and how much do you know about playbooks? Well, I made a lovely poll with 4 answers, and now you only get 2. But anyway, how many of you are using playbooks today? And oh, wait, no, I did it right. Hang on a second. Boy, I'm just having quite a morning, you guys. All right, so the first question I'm going to put out there for you is, are you using sales playbooks today? Kevin's going to, clobber me over here. And so you have a couple choices for answers. So while Kevin and I are talking, take a look at that and give us an update of where you are in this playbook journey, whether you're using one now, whether you have one, but you're not really using it, or maybe you are just starting to think about how you want to use one. Give us some input on that. And Kevin and I are going to chat just a little bit while you're doing that. So the agenda for today is pretty simple. We're going to start by introducing the idea of playbooks, and we're going to talk about the elements of a playbook. And then we're going to talk about what you really want to know, which is building a playbook. And then Kevin and I wanted to stop and talk about some common mistakes that people make so that you can avoid them. And then the concept of a living playbook, which is really, really important. What we know about salespeople is if you don't give them the latest and greatest, they aren't using it. So how do we keep our playbooks alive and active and our salespeople using them? So that's what we're going to talk about. If there's anything that we have not got on that list that you want to know about, please put it into the question section, and we would love to answer that for you. Okay, so I'm having a little trouble making forward work. Kevin, what is a playbook?
Well, looking at the votes from the audience, there's at least one answer that's talking about football. So what is a playbook? A playbook, I think the analogy comes originally from sports, from football, where coaches would hand out binders with all of the plays in them. And so, the players would then drill these plays so that when they're actually in the game, the plays are they're drilled, right? So they can actually call the play and run it because they've drilled it thousands of times. And so in the context of an organization, in a business, a playbook serves a similar purpose in that it's a collection of all of the plays that you run, all of the things that work really well. And so what this serves to do is it captures all of the best practices so that anybody on the team can run them, when they're in the course of a sales cycle. Another thing that it does really well is it helps to orchestrate the deal. And so, oftentimes you'll have multiple people touching a deal. So you could have something like an SDR, a rep, a partner person, maybe a solutions consultant, maybe somebody in legal that reviews the contracts. And so, those handoffs are really important. So having a playbook also helps to make sure that these transactions happen smoothly. And so part of it is like, part of it is transactional, and part of it is like, who's our ideal customer? What are the right questions to ask? The collection of all of that knowledge, all these best practices put together means that you can enable your team with a series of, these playbooks are a collection of series of plays that makes them more effective at what they do.
Oh, and that is so important. When we have our sales team out there and all of the players in the sales process that coordinate with them, and they don't have a playbook and they don't know how to hand things off and they're missing steps, it is hugely costly. And what we don't want to do is lose sales because we haven't done all of the important things that need to be done. So a playbook is a great way to put that information together so that your team has access to it. So Kevin, what I understand you saying, though, is that a playbook is not a manual.
It is not a manual. 100%. It has to be something that people, want to use and actively use, and that's not a manual. And so this is, if you think about when was the last time you actually read a manual, you open the box or whatever.
Right? You just download them when things aren't working, right? You're like, here's the manual.
Yeah, the manual is Google.
Throw it in the trash and download it when something breaks.
Yeah, exactly. So it really needs to be. There's this happy medium. I think we'll spend a bit more time in this Bright Talk talking about like how to build one. But there's a happy medium between enough direction to guide your team, to tell them what needs to be done, but not so much detail that it becomes this unwieldy manual. I worked with, early on, I worked with a client who was in the insurance industry, and he said, Kevin, when I started here, they threw this book on my desk. It was 900 pages, double-sided. And they said,
what not to do to your salespeople.
Yeah, that's an extreme example. But really, it needs to be something that that people use, and so that's really, really important. And one of the things that we say at CloseQuickly is like we like to put the play in playbook, right? It needs to be fun. It needs to be visual. It needs to be live. It needs to be something that your people feel connected to, and so. They need to have a part in helping to build the playbook, and they need to, feel connected to using it every day.
Yeah, we absolutely need to make sure that our salespeople want to use it. No point doing it if they don't. So, Kevin, let me ask you a little bit about, what is a playbook? So we're going to talk about that, but are there more than one kind of playbook? Should we just have one playbook for the entire organization, or do you have different ones for different things or different people? How does that work?
Yeah, it's all of the above. And so often what people will do is they'll start with, one sales playbook, which closely aligns with the sales process. It's sort of the execution part of the sales process. But then what you'll see is companies often will have more than one most companies have more than one product or solution. And so as those launch or go to market, you'll then spin up separate playbooks for those solutions, products. Different geographies will have, often different playbooks as well, even verticals. And so you may have a product that's relevant to one industry, say construction, but then you're doing, maybe it's commercial real estate, which is a little bit different. It might be the same product, but the way that you're qualifying prospects, the way that you're the tools that you're using, the sales collateral, the questions you're asking may be different. And so what we see is that people will often start with one that's aligned to the sales process, and then others will follow soon after.
So you could have it, Just to simplify, Kevin, so you could have it by different vertical or by different product, or you might have something different by geography, or you might have something for the SDRs that's different than your outbound team. I mean, not your outbound team, your sales executives who are out meeting people. Like, you could have all different kinds of playbooks.
Yes. And partners as well. Yep.
And partners as well. Absolutely. And that is one of the things when we start talking about partners and channels, that is one area where my clients are constantly saying, you know, how do I get my channel to do what I need them to do? And one of the ways is to give them all the tools they need to make it easy for them. So, Kevin, let's move on to why we need a playbook. I get it. The playbook is essentially where you put the information your sales team needs during the sales process. But what are some of the reasons that companies decide they actually need to do this? What kinds of problems are they trying to fix? Like, what makes somebody go, oh, I'm going to put the time and effort and expense into making a playbook? What would make them, get there?
I'll use a really simple example to start with, and that is, as a team grows, right? So in the early days, when a team is relatively small, maybe it's a startup with a founder and a couple of salespeople. They're all sitting, their desks are really close together, and they can share this tribal knowledge, right? So they know what works. They inherently know what works. At the same time, you've got these, they're all rock stars. They can all sort of figure out what works without, an instruction manual that's built in their DNA. But as the team grows, now maybe you've got, 6, a dozen, 2 dozen. It becomes harder and harder to transfer that tribal knowledge to the next,
right.
1, 2, 5, 10 hires.
True.
And so, so you then start to have this need to document the knowledge. And so if I put it in super simple terms, it's just like, what works. Now, how do you transfer that knowledge to the next hire, to the next 5 hires? And so, the other role that a playbook is really valuable in is onboarding. As you bring on new people, you're going to go, we know what works, but it's all in my head, or it's all in my top salesperson's head. And I'd rather have that salesperson, on the phone with customers than, spending all their time onboarding new hires. And so the process of documenting it, taking all of these best practices, you now know what works, let's capture it into a playbook. And that, I mentioned the words consistency and repeatability earlier. I might need to find words that are shorter, but that's really what it's about, right? Like, when you start looking at this and going, how do I enable the next group of hires? How do I enable the entire team to run like a machine with consistency and repeatability, right? So that, this is a good point to bring up. Playbooks make sense once you know what works. And so if it's early and you're still experimenting quite a bit, then, a playbook might not make sense for you at that point. But once you know what works, you know who that ideal buyer is, what questions to ask, what qualifying questions to ask, what pieces of collateral to use, then it's time to build a playbook, because then you enable the team to sort of do this repeatably. And the other thing it does is actually, once they build the fundamentals, it actually frees them up. They can now, the fundamentals are solid, it's built into organizational behavior. They can actually spend energy on higher level things like, deal strategy, understanding the customer's problems more, because, everything that's fundamental, they can already do. And the things like, handoffs between different people in the sale, like, that's already covered in the playbook. So, does that?
Yeah, it does. And some of the things that you and I have talked about, so if we talk about the actual problems that people are having, one is that best practices aren't being followed, right? So if best practices aren't being followed, they might say, we need this consistency, repeatability thing. Let's create a playbook. Or if you have people that are functioning at all different levels, you may want to figure out, how do I level up the team players up to the higher level, and a playbook may give you some ability to do that. You know, if you raise the average by just a few points, that could be worth millions of dollars depending on the size of your company or more. And I think the scaling thing that you were talking about is really important. So when we're all sitting in the room together and there's just a handful of us, we can talk about things. But as you add people, as you add players to your team, you really need to have a way to make sure there's consistency and onboarding and ways to get the team performing. So that scalability is huge. If you need to scale, a playbook is a really helpful tool. So
I think you bring sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think you brought up a good point with the you know, raising the average by a few points, because it's like the question you ask is, you know, what if you could what if you could duplicate your best sales rep, right? What if you could capture the best things that they do and have the rest of the team do that? Could you help the rest of the team, you know, improve, you know, their results? And that's the sort of thing that
there's a lot of sales leaders who would like to have that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see if I can get the slide to move. How do you use a playbook is the next thing that we want to talk about.
Yeah, you know, Liz, this is something I want to actually ask you. You had mentioned at the, you know, earlier that your clients were asking you for playbooks. How do you see people using playbooks?
Well, I can tell you the things that they ask me about. You know, it really, how they use them is really dependent upon the problem that they're solving. So we were just talking a little bit about problems, but typically when I'm working with a company, there are a couple times that they want to put a sales playbook into place. One is when they're getting ready to hire their first salespeople. The problem often is that you're trying to get the information from the founder's head onto paper, if you will, so that they can share it effectively with the new salespeople. So the founder has been sort of doing their thing and being really successful, and they don't really know how to duplicate themselves. So if we can get this written down and documented so that salespeople can use it and follow it, that helps them to bring on new salespeople effectively. You know, and often we find that what we were talking about before, you can have up to 5 people on a sales team without really having a strong sales process and a way to convey it. But at some point, if the company wants to scale, they're going to say, hey, we need to really document this and follow this and make sure everybody understands how to do it. So playbooks, again, are a great way to do that. Another time that people will come to me about a playbook is when they're dealing with a change, a major change. So they have a new product or a new sales landscape. You know, I work a lot with companies selling into hospitals, and that landscape seems like it's an ever-changing landscape. Or maybe they have a new go-to-market strategy. Whatever it is, they now need to help their sales team understand how to navigate whatever that change is. And sometimes one of the problems that is happening is that the sales team isn't using the best tools at the best time. So for instance, how often have you had a salesperson hand the wrong price sheet to a client and you just want to scream, right? So if we can make sure that they have access to the latest and greatest and most accurate, and they know when to use which things, that's really helpful. You know, this tool is really good at this point in the sales process. This article, this white paper goes to this person at this time. And that becomes really helpful with the salespeople because they're not guessing. They're like, oh, I used this. This was great. So anyway, it really depends on what the problem is that people are solving, but those are the kinds of things that I hear most often.
I couldn't agree more. And you bring up a good point with you know, using the right tool in the right context. That's super important. Another, you know, I'll bring it up now while I think of it. But you know, I think it's worthwhile to also involve other departments like marketing in the process of building the playbook, because then you're actually, you know, when they're producing sales collateral, like presentation decks, customer, references, things like that. It's in context with the sales process and the sales playbook, right? There's a specific stage and a time and an audience that you use it for. And so that context is super important. They're not just going to the shared drive and grabbing, whatever they can find and just, shooting it over.
Yeah, and hoping and praying it's the right thing.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the salespeople hate it as much as the marketing and everybody else when they grab the wrong thing, and now they've got to deal with, I've given the wrong pricing information, or I've given an outdated PDF about the details of this product. They want the latest and greatest at the right time, at their fingertips, quickly. And so when we can give them that, it's a huge gift to them. And if you want your sales team to use your playbook, that is what you have to give to them, is what they need at their fingertips when they need it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of an analogy where you sort of have, on the one hand, you have maybe you're sitting down to a meal and there's 5 courses. Each course comes out, there's the food, there's the beverage, and it's all lined up, and you know exactly what to do when, versus here's a kitchen, here's a bunch of ingredients, have at it, right? It's just, people have to reinvent it every time. You might get some really creative stuff, but.
And your playbook tells you which fork to use.
Outside in, Liz, outside in.
Okay, so Kevin, let's talk a little bit about the elements of a playbook. So we talked about the how and the why a little bit, but what do you actually put in a playbook? That, I think, is what our guests really want to know today. What do you think goes into a playbook?
Yep, 5 things. 5 things, because good things come in 3s, 5s, and 7s sometimes. A proper sales process, I think that is a prerequisite. And I think that even if you're, everything changes all the time. And so it even if you're looking at your sales process going, there's a few things we'd like to change, it's okay. And I think I'd actually like to spend a little bit of time asking you more about your thoughts on sales process. That's one. The next 3 sit underneath the sales process, and so these are actions, resources, and questions. I'll spend a little bit more time on those 3 in a minute, and then the last one is adoption. And so I think a lot of people in the audience, according to the poll, have some playbooks, but they're not widely adopted. I myself have been there. I've been through this journey. I have, spent many, many weeks putting together, very detailed playbooks, got up on stage at sales kickoff and said, this year we're going to go out and, sell this product to this audience in this geography, and here's the playbooks, and everyone's all excited. And then, the playbooks just sit on their desks for the rest of the year and don't get used. So I think, adoption is super, super key. So to me, the core elements of effective or ultimate playbooks, 5 things: sales process. These things need to be aligned. One more thing we don't have here related to that is CRM. So CRM should be aligned with the sales process and the sales playbook. It doesn't replace either of them. It's just the tool that captures, opportunities in the funnel. The next 3 are actions, resources, questions. I'll spend a little bit more time talking about what those are. And then adoption.
I love that arc, because it helps you kind of remember that these are all important when you're building a playbook. These are the things that need to be in there so your sales team can use it. So I want to start really talking about sales process, because I am right with you. You've got to have an effective sales process if you're going to build a playbook. So I want to ask you guys, let's go ahead and do another poll and see how many of you actually have an established sales process. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what exactly a sales process is. And then as we're talking about that, you guys can answer that question. But sales process is the foundation of your sales playbook. So let me run through a little bit really quickly what a sales process is. The first thing I want to tell you is that this document in a little bit more detail is one of the downloads available to you today. So it's an attachment. So when you get ready to build out your sales process, this will help you think about what kinds of things should be in there. So this is just a sample. But a sales process defines the steps your sales team will make to close a sale. So from the first conversation to the signing of the documents, your sales process maps out exactly what will happen. And the more complex your sale is, the more important that process becomes, because if it's a complex sale, it's going to take longer, there's going to be more people involved, there's going to be more steps involved. So mapping that out is critical. We typically have 5 or 6 stages in a sales process. I usually refer to them as prospect, qualify, cultivate, close, and won or lost. And that is all you really need. And I know some of you probably have 13 or 15 steps in your sales process, but the stages of your sales process are these. And all of the rest of the things that appear in the sales process are really actions and questions as opposed to stages. So during each stage, you'll have certain activities that have to happen and questions that need to be answered. We're going to map those out in a sales process and then put them under the appropriate categories. Now, what you'll see in here is I've arbitrarily put some actions in different places, but in your sales process, you may have a different action in a different order than what appears on this sample, and that's okay. For instance, although this is not my favorite philosophy, some companies do their first proposal during qualify, and other companies don't do a proposal until they're ready to close. So it really depends a lot on your sales process and how it works best. Hang on just a second. So really that's the key to a sales process. So this helps your salesperson know what stage am I in, what action needs to happen, what questions need to be answered. And what's really cool is once you do that, you can put this into your CRM and you can say to them, hey, during this stage, you do these activities and you answer these questions. And if you haven't gotten those questions answered or you haven't done these activities, you can't move it to the next stage. So you can't move to close if you haven't done all of the things in prospect, qualify, and cultivate. And that becomes really important. And if you're when you're thinking about how you want your playbook to look, because you want to be really clear that everybody knows what to do when, and then you can put it over into the playbook. Kevin, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's great. You know, there's sales process itself is probably a whole separate Bright Talk, which you've probably done. But I mean, lots of people. There's lots of detail in there, but I think you know, in the general case, that's absolutely right. Like, you know, these cover the general stages. Every deal at some point has to, you know, there's prospecting that happens. There's some sort of qualification that happens. You know, there's some sort of cultivate, and there's various sales processes out there. You know, the names are different, but more or less, you know, because we work across all of them, we're agnostic. You know, they more or less sort of fall into these broad buckets. And, you know, what you'll see is that if you skip a stage, if you skip qualifying and you end up trying to close, you might have to end up, you know, going back up to qualify because maybe there wasn't a budget, or the person that you're working with doesn't have signing authority, or, you know, they actually don't have a timeline. And so, you know, all these things are in the sales process for a reason. And I think that, like, you know, you've covered it. There's probably a little more that people could, you know, actually they should talk to Liz. Liz is an expert.
And I actually
this is why people work with Liz. Yeah.
I just did a webinar on funnels that talks a little bit about the sales process. And if you're really interested in building a sales process, I think next month I'm going to do a webinar on building your sales process. So keep an eye out for that, and we can really go into details. But I want to go back, Kevin, to this idea of ARC. Tell us a little bit about, ARC. Walk us through this.
Yes, and so let me first say, whatever you have as a process now, like that's your sales process, right? It may, maybe you need to define the extra criteria better or things like that, but you have one, right? Like, and perhaps it could be improved. That's quite normal at every company that I've been at. But the next thing is like, what are the actions that you want people to do at each stage of the sales cycle? What are the resources you want them to use at that stage? And so often, what, I have some screenshots that I'll show in a minute here of examples of resources. And then like questions. Questions are very, very powerful. I actually took a course with Liz a little while back on, selling for founders. And one of the best takeaways I learned from that was precision questioning. Asking the right questions can be very, very powerful. And so if you know the right questions to ask already at each stage, then you might as well help your reps out by planting those questions for them, right? Have them ask the right questions at the right stage. And then, I talked briefly about adoption. I'm just going to skip ahead here and show some examples of Liz, do you mind? Is there anything you want to cover back there? If not, I'll just go right into building a playbook and showing some examples.
Let's go into building a playbook, because I think that's where we really want to be. We've got all the basics. Let's go ahead and look at what is a playbook. I think before we do this, though, I don't think we talked about this yet very much, but one of the things that people ask me is what should be in a playbook, or rather, what should the playbook look like? Like, should it be a PDF? Should it be a Word document? Should it be should it be some sort of a platform? Should it be
anything
really
that works for you?
Should it be? Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And it can be anything, and I've done all of them in the past. Like I said, most commonly PowerPoint slides are, that's probably the thing that gets used the most, PowerPoint or Google Slides. They could take the form of, even Word docs, PDFs, or sometimes they actually even show up in Excel, spreadsheets for the really masochistic people out there. But the format, it can take any format. But I think the thing that's really, really key is to keep in mind your audience, right? Like, what's the easiest way for them to use it? Adoption is the most important part of playbooks. I think, in the poll, some people had mentioned that they already have playbooks, but, they're not quite getting all the adoption that they're looking for, and I can relate, right? And so when you choose a format, no matter what it is, think about how it will be used. Think about what's easiest for your audience.
And think about who your audience is, right? So I have to admit, I actually created a beautiful online playbook for a company one time, who then asked me if I could please put it into a PDF, because their people couldn't deal with going online to get things. I was just shocked. But we really need to understand who our audience is. And if you have people who are not high tech, they're not techies, they don't like to go on the internet, they don't, carry around an iPad or whatever, then it may be that you need something a little bit more low tech. But let's talk about some platforms, or the idea of an online or a platform to make your playbook. Yeah.
So CloseQuickly is one such platform. We've taken basically decades of experience building playbooks and put it into a digital format online as a SaaS tool that puts together all of these elements that we've talked about, into a digital format, right? So You see here we have the sales stages on the left-hand side. For a given sales stage, we break that down into steps, and then for each step, we provide guidance. And so, guidance can be the form of text, it can be video, it can be, audio. We really recommend multimedia because it's much more engaging for a sales audience. And so, fundamentally, that's it, right? So, like I said, this could have been inside of a PDF, could have been a PowerPoint. We think sort of digital is the way forward. Sales stages, break those stages down into steps. What are the steps you want to do to accomplish that stage, and then provide guidance for each of the steps. I'll show briefly an example of a resource. So if you remember, actions, resources, and questions. Resource is the first one was actions, right? What do you want people to do at each stage and each step? Next one is resources. We had talked earlier about context. It's super important not just to have the sales tools, and every organization, every single one has a ton of sales tools, right? They have presentation decks and brochures and customer case studies. We could all probably use a few more case studies. That's natural. But having that in context is really, really important. And so, earlier I was talking of the slide before this. I was showing, prospecting who's the right buyer. And so here I have a buyer persona sheet that then the user can grab on the spot when they're in that stage and dig into buyer persona. The Q in ARC talks about questions, and I wanted to show an example of how that could look inside of a playbook. So now you've got your sales process here on the side. You've got actions, which take the form of the steps and guidance, and then questions. Once you know those questions, have them built in to your playbook. And so in this case, we're in the qualify stage and we're doing the demo. Some of the questions we might ask might be things like, does this look like a tool that would be useful to your team? Does this look like it's easier than what you're doing today? What things do you like most? How could you see yourself using this on a day-to-day basis? So these questions, and whatever questions work for your industry, your product, one process might be to actually poll your entire team and go, like, let's have a little contest. Give me your best, qualifying questions. Give me your best demo questions. Make that fun for the whole team. And then once you gather sort of the whole universe of these questions that the entire team is using, pick the best 5 for each given stage, right? So we talked earlier about best practices, collecting that. We should be actually crowdsourcing all of this information, right? Get your best people to help you source the questions, the resources, the actions. Get their involvement in building it, so that it's something that they have, they've taken part in, and it's actually tested in the field on customers.
So Kevin, thanks so much for walking us through sort of what, why, and how. Let's talk really quickly before we run out of time about what are some of the most common mistakes that people make when they're making a playbook.
For me, the biggest thing is building it in a vacuum, not getting buy-in, and then the result of that is not getting the adoption that they're looking for. And so I talked about a little bit, which is make sure you're getting people to buy in throughout the journey of building the playbook. It doesn't have to be a long journey. I would say that it's much better to build and launch, let people know that we're starting this process, get their involvement, get their feedback, and keep it updated. You have to keep it alive. And so take that feedback, and keep updating the playbooks. That's probably the other biggest mistake I see is, launching a playbook at sales kickoff and then not touching it again until, the following sales kickoff a year later. And so, people it doesn't get used. So it's adoption.
So I want to just reiterate. So not being clear about your purpose. If you don't know why you're doing it, you're probably not going to do it right. So know what problems you're trying to solve before you start, right? Second is, it's not just about the selling process, it's also about the buying process. If you don't understand how your buyer buys, then you can't really build a good sales process. So that's really important. The working in a vacuum, if you make a sales playbook for your sales team without your sales team telling you how things work, they're not going to use it because it's not going to relate to them, right? So, and we talked about this before. Creating something that's too hard to use will definitely make sure your sales team is not using it. And again, not keeping it up to date. So let's talk about the takeaways, which are essentially the same as the mistakes. Know who you're creating know why you're creating the playbook. Start with a sales process. Simple is better. Kevin keeps telling me this. Simple is better.
Yes.
Simple is better. Get team buy-in and participation. Keep your playbook alive and get help. If you are not sure exactly what to do, ask someone for help so that you really have the best playbook that you can have after you've spent all that time and energy. So we are just about out of time, Kevin. I want to make sure that everybody knows how to reach us. You can find this information in your in the downloaded PowerPoint. Well, Kevin, I thought I put your
it's so you can reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, email, phone, website, whatever works for you guys.
And if you have questions, I don't see any questions from the audience right now, but if you have questions, you've got my email address, liz@alicehyman.com. It's on the last page of the download. And you can also reach out to me in LinkedIn, ask any question that you want, and we would be happy to answer it. So we are over time. We need to go now. Have a fabulous day. Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing this time with us.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you to the audience.